I discovered everything on a Wednesday morning, at 5:26 a.m., when Ethan's phone buzzed softly on the walnut kitchen counter. The strange thing was, he was still fast asleep next to me on the couch, after a night of claiming he was working late. The screen lit up with a message. "I'm wearing the red dress today. I doubt you'll be able to take your eyes off me." I didn't touch the phone, I just stared at it. My hand froze on the handle of the coffee pot. In 18 years of marriage, I'd never once checked my husband's phone. Not out of naivety, but because I used to believe that kindness didn't need proof. When Ethan stirred, his hair tousled and voice groggy, "Morning, sweetheart." I nodded and placed a cup of coffee in front of him, just like always. He glanced at his phone and quickly deleted something, his fingers moving so fast it looked secretive. I stayed silent, my lips pressed together until it hurt. No one teaches you how to stay calm when your gut tells you the man who shared almost 2 decades with you is quietly erasing you from his life. 3 days later, while gathering his clothes for dry cleaning, a thin restaurant receipt fell out of the pocket of Ethan's blazer. Solstice Restaurant, 2 New York strip steaks, 2 glasses of red wine, 1 panna cotta. The date? Last Friday. The same night, I made his favorite lasagna and ate it alone in front of the TV until 10 p.m. I held the flimsy slip in my hand, frozen in the laundry room. In my mind, I pictured Ethan across from another woman, laughing, holding a wine glass, whispering the kinds of things he once said only to me. His voice behind me made me flinch. "Find something interesting?" I turned around, still holding the receipt. He looked at it, then at me. My breath was shallow, but my voice stayed even. "Just collecting laundry." He stepped closer, took the shirt from my hand, and nodded slowly, like everything was normal. "You're always so thoughtful," he said, smiling. The same smile that once melted me back in design school. Now, it just made me sick. That night, Ethan slept with his back to me. His phone was face down and tucked under his pillow. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding like a clock on the wall. Silence in a marriage comes in many forms. Sometimes as quiet understanding, other times like a blade. The next morning, I called Ethan's office to ask about the family dinner I was planning. His assistant Kelsey answered. Her voice was syrupy sweet, yet sharp enough to cut. "Oh, hi, Natalie. Ethan's in a meeting right now, but I'll let him know you called." "Thanks. Please, tell him to call me back." "It's personal. He's probably tied up all evening again. His schedule's been packed lately," she added, with a hint of smugness. I hung up with trembling hands. The way she said his name, Ethan, not Mr. Clark, made my skin crawl. She wasn't hiding the intimacy. She wanted me to feel it, even through the phone. I used to think if my husband ever cheated, I'd just know. But betrayal doesn't strike like lightning. It drips slowly, like water wearing down stone. Until you look down and realize you've been eroded. Thursday night brought an unusual chill for mid-May in Oregon. I stopped by the store for a loaf of bread and a bottle of red wine, hoping to warm up the distance between us with a simple dinner. But when I opened the front door, the hallway light was off, and the slightly ajar office door let out sounds, none of which were typing or phone calls. It was his voice, low, calm, calculated. "She doesn't suspect a thing. Still cooks dinner, still does my laundry like a machine." Silence. Then laughter. Not his. A woman's voice. Young, confident. "Told you. Women like her never believe they've been replaced until the divorce papers hit." I stood frozen, back pressed against the cold wall. My breath caught in my chest as Ethan replied, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I've talked to the lawyer. As soon as possible. The asset division is almost done, don't worry. She'll be out of this house with a suitcase and a couple of small checks." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Those words weren't a conversation. They were a sentence. I can't wait months, Ethan. I want to be your wife. Officially. We'll be fine, Jules. Jules. Not Kelsey. Who was Jules? Definitely not his assistant. This woman spoke with the certainty of someone who'd been promised something. Even a stranger outside the door could hear the sweetness laced with venom. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll sell the house. We'll start fresh. Just the two of us. Ethan chuckled. She doesn't have her name on anything. She still thinks the savings account is real. It's only 14 grand. The rest, I already moved to the anonymous trust. I don't remember how I peeled myself off that wall. Only that when I slipped out the back door, the wine bottle was still in the bag. But my hands were soaked in sweat. It wasn't just infidelity. What Ethan and this woman, Jules, were doing went far beyond that. They were calculating my erasure like a spreadsheet, turning 18 years of marriage into a liability to eliminate. No emotion, no remorse, just signatures and silence. I sat in the car for a long time. I didn't cry, didn't scream. One question looped through my mind. When did I disappear without even noticing? I remembered the last time Ethan touched my shoulder while I was washing dishes. Maybe 4 months ago. The last dinner we had without his phone on the table? Probably Christmas. The signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. But now, I saw everything clearly. I was the obstacle. The legal burden Ethan wanted to eliminate from the new life he was building with Jules. And that very night, I understood one thing. If he wanted to fight with lawyers, I would fight with memory. If he wanted to calculate assets, I would count every ounce of trust he had burned over the years. I wasn't going to run to a lawyer's office. I wouldn't confront Ethan. I wouldn't storm into his illusion of a romantic dinner with his mistress. I simply stood up and pulled out a notebook. Write the first line. May 16th. Jules called Ethan baby. Ethan mentioned a lawyer. Said everything was in place to leave me with nothing. I recorded every word, every laugh, every sentence in my mind. Each detail like a pair of shears cutting through the 18 years I once believed were love. This marriage had become a performance, and I would be the one to rewrite the final act. I started with the simplest thing, observation. Ethan left the house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6:40 a.m., always saying he had early meetings with clients. But from the second-floor window, I saw he often stopped at a small coffee shop near downtown, the one I remembered only one person from his firm ever frequented. Daniel Moore, co-founder of the financial company Ethan ran. Daniel had appeared at a few Christmas parties in past years, quiet, polite, almost like a shadow. I only recalled one time he spoke to me, asking about the book I was reading, never once mentioning deals or contracts. There was something about him that didn't fit Ethan's world. No flash, no performance. They started going to that coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday, always sitting near the window, bringing my laptop and fake paperwork as if I was doing bookkeeping for the local yoga studio. On the 5th morning at exactly 7:10 a.m., Daniel walked in. Gray button-down, black coffee, no sugar. He took the same seat near the window, didn't look around, opened his tablet and began reading. I waited until the 3rd time before walking over, speaking softly as if it were a coincidence. Mr. Moore, I'm Natalie, Ethan Clark's wife. He looked up. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but no irritation. Yes, I remember you. He gestured to the seat across from him. Have a seat. I'm guessing this isn't a casual encounter. I nodded. I need to speak with you. Not as a wife, but as someone being shut out of a plan I once believed was shared. Daniel closed his tablet and folded his arms. His eyes sharpened, suddenly colder. How much do you know? I told him. Everything. The call between Ethan and Jules, the promise to leave me penniless, the bank accounts I only knew the surface of. I didn't talk about emotions. I wanted to speak like someone who understood the game, not a victim seeking pity. Daniel didn't interrupt. When I finished, he pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. You need to see this. Inside were printed internal email chains, financial reports, shareholder charts, all with clear indicators that Ethan was slowly cutting Daniel out of the firm's most valuable investments. He's using a string of shell companies to funnel profits into a personal account. Everything looks clean on paper unless someone digs deep. Very deep, Daniel said, his voice low and tightly controlled. I suspected something, but I didn't think he'd screw me inside a company I helped build. I sat motionless. What are you planning to do? Gather evidence. Prove Ethan isn't just betraying me, he's breaking the law. Daniel leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. I can help, but we need to be careful. Ethan thinks he's clever. That's his weakness. I can help, but we need to be careful. Ethan thinks he's clever. That's his weakness. From that day on, I became someone entirely different. By day, I was the quiet wife, still making dinner, still smiling as Ethan vented about work stress. By night, I slipped into his office, the one I used to walk into freely, now feeling like a restricted zone. I found his new computer password using an old trick, the birthday of his mother's cat plus the first 3 letters of Jules's name. A man who could move millions forgot his wife had a memory sharp enough to remember a pet's vaccination schedule. I got in. Inside were folders full of financial files, but nothing clearly labeled. I had to dig through every document, every statement, every weekly encrypted Excel file. Under the folder 2023 Insurance, I found a transfer log to something called Horizon Fund, which turned out to be an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a third-party company. I photographed each page, moved them to an encrypted USB, erased the login history, checked the room's camera. Nothing there. Daniel taught me how to trace fund flows, spot tax evasion tactics, and analyze suspicious profit ratios. Every Tuesday morning, we met at the usual cafe, barely speaking, just exchanging folders, notes, and progress. I collected emails between Ethan and Jules, stored on an old phone hidden behind the closet drawer. I recorded internal calls when Ethan accidentally left his speaker on. He suspected nothing, still kissed my cheek every morning, still invited me to open houses on weekends, probably already calculating how much he'd get from selling properties in the divorce he believed I didn't know about. I began to perform, not with tears and accusations. That would make Ethan defensive. I chose a different act, soft, wounded, and desperately eager to fix things. One evening in late June, just after he finished his shower, I walked into the room with red-rimmed eyes and a choked-up voice. Lately. I know there's been distance between us lately, but if you're still willing to try, so am I. He paused slightly, a cautious glance flickering across my face, then softened instinctively. I knew exactly how he operated. Conflict meant quick comfort. Yeah, I feel it too. Maybe we should spend more time together, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder, eyes darting as if reading from an old script. I lowered my eyes, letting the silence stretch, like I was still holding on to one last fragile hope. But inside, I already knew Ethan didn't love me. He was just trying to keep me around, long enough to wrap up his plan without a hitch. The next evening, I accidentally left a printed bank statement on the dining table, then pretended to look flustered when Ethan saw it. I meant to ask you about this Horizon Investment Solutions entry. Sounds odd. I thought our savings were only at First West. Ethan froze for exactly 1 second. Just one. But enough for me to memorize it. He gave a weak smile, bending down to clear the plates. Oh, that's just a flexible investment. Temporary transfer for better interest rates. Don't worry about those things. I managed a faint smile, just enough to mask the tension in my jaw. Okay? I was just a little worried. There's been so much fraud in the news lately. I noticed his grip on the glass was a little too tight. He rushed through the dishes, went upstairs early. And within the next 36 hours, Daniel confirmed that Ethan had moved funds to a completely new account under a Delaware-based company. I didn't need to lift a finger. All I had to do was plant doubt at the right moment. Ethan would panic and leave a trail. A few weeks later, I turned up the performance. Gently, I suggested we try marriage counseling. I know things aren't the same, but if you're willing, we could give it a shot. I found a therapist. She has an opening next week. Ethan sighed, then shook his head. I really don't have time for emotional stuff, Natalie. The company's going through audit season. An ordinary sentence. Except, I knew Ethan's company never conducted internal audits during summer. That line was a cover. For something. Or someone. As summer passed, I kept up the act of the wife trying to save the marriage. I'd bring up old memories, suggest trips to visit my parents in Vermont, or plan weekend getaways. Ethan agreed to everything, but his eyes were always on the clock, fingers always on his phone. I knew exactly who was on the other end. Once, while he was in the shower, I intentionally left my phone open, showing a fake chat with Linda, my imaginary best friend, with the last message on screen. I suspect Jules isn't just a mistress. She might be involved in Ethan's finances. I'm thinking of hiring a forensic asset investigator, but it has to be discreet. I made sure he saw it. The screen was still lit when he came out, and I pretended to fumble to grab it, saying, "It's nothing." 2 days later, Daniel reported that Ethan had suddenly called his attorney in the middle of the night, demanding a review of all potentially traceable documents. At the same time, Jules, or more precisely, Julianne Prescott, began showing up in internal emails as a freelance business consultant. I wasn't surprised. When a woman moves from the bedroom to the boardroom too fast, she leaves tracks. Jules, with her arrogance and blind ambition, was the biggest crack in Ethan's plan. If she got involved too deeply, with files, transactions, or investment decisions, then the evidence we needed would gain legal weight. I pushed Ethan closer to Jules every day, suggested he delegate more to ease stress, proposed that Jules help with partner communication so I wouldn't interfere too much. He took the bait. Both of them believed they were in control. And me? I was just writing the final monologue. Ethan filed for divorce in early September. Right on cue. I received the official notice on a Monday morning, along with his proposed settlement. In it, he asked that I vacate the house within 6 weeks, accept a temporary support payment to help me get back on my feet, and waive any claim to business assets. According to him, this divorce would be smooth, civilized, and fair as long as I didn't make it difficult. I smiled when I read that line. Ethan still thought I was the same woman, meek, tolerant, too exhausted to fight back. I gave him that. But not by surrendering. By delivering a flawless performance to the very end. I hired Harold West, a divorce attorney everyone knew, sluggish, easily swayed, and notably, hadn't won a meaningful case in a decade. Ethan would investigate, no doubt, and when he saw that name, he'd feel entirely safe that I had no shot at challenging the meticulous plan he'd laid out. That Harold was just a decoy. My real attorney was Jessica Blanchard, a discreet Harvard graduate with 12 years of experience dismantling the most complex financial shells in high-stakes divorces. I met her in a small office in West Portland. No sign, no flashy reception area. But what Jessica had, offshore asset maps, traces of Ethan's Delaware shell company, and financial trails, was enough to turn Ethan's settlement proposal into a courtroom joke. "We're not going to expose him right away," Jessica said. "We'll let him trip over his own terms. I don't just want to win. I want him to think he's won until the ground crumbles beneath him." On the day of the hearing, I wore a pale blue dress, hair pinned up, no heavy makeup. I looked tired but composed, the perfect image of a wife clinging to the last thread of an 18-year marriage. Harold played his part, flipping to the wrong pages, fumbling with files, even dropping his glasses mid-session. The courtroom looked at me with pity. Ethan, on the other hand, looked so relaxed, I could see him trying to suppress a smirk. His lawyer, a woman named Carla Monroe, began outlining the reasonable terms of reconciliation. Natalie would receive a small amount of property, stay out of the company, and agree not to pursue any future financial claims. I pretended to choke up when I heard that clause. "I don't want anything," I whispered, just loud enough for the judge to hear. "I just hope he can focus on his business." Ethan offered a measured tilt of his head, the kind he probably thought looked gracious. Carla continued listing the undisputed assets, mostly old vehicles, some depreciated furniture, and a joint account with less than $20,000. Accepted. And in every document I signed, there were tiny clauses, almost invisible, inserted by Jessica. For example, I waived rights to Ethan's business accounts, unless those accounts were connected to any unethical or illegal transactions. I agreed Ethan could keep the house if he could prove that the funds used to purchase it came from lawful profits, and that no undeclared third-party investments were involved. I accepted a lower asset settlement as long as property valuation was based on an independent audit confirmed by a third party. Everything looked reasonable, until Ethan had to prove it all, and couldn't. When the hearing ended, I bowed slightly to the judge, my hands trembling like someone reeling from a personal blow. Ethan stepped closer and leaned in to whisper, "Thank you for being decent, Nat. I know you're not the petty type." I looked up at him, offered a faint smile. "I never was, Ethan. I just learned to read the fine print." Carla shook Harold's hand, thanking him for the pleasant cooperation. Ethan walked out of the courthouse like a man who had just won the easiest divorce negotiation of his life. He didn't realize he'd just signed his own downfall. 3 weeks after the trial, Ethan thought he was in the clear. He fully moved into a penthouse in the Pearl District, bought a new car, and showed up at an investment seminar with jewels on his arm, wearing a constant grin like he'd just won a high-stakes poker game. I watched everything in silence. But Daniel didn't. On Monday morning, exactly 8:30 a.m., Daniel called an emergency meeting at Altura Capital headquarters. 6 board members. Ethan wasn't the top executive, but he had long manipulated most decisions with charm and a stream of high-yield projects he led. Daniel entered the conference room with a thick file in hand and a voice like a blade. "We need to address a serious issue. Ethan Clark's offshore accounts have been used to siphon profits from 3 major projects, without board approval." Ethan, seated at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. "I thought I'd already explained those funds." Daniel held up a hand, cutting him off. He passed the folder to each person at the table. "Here's the evidence, along with email correspondence between Ethan and someone named Julianne Prescott, who referred to herself as a private advisor, yet has no employment contract with Altura Capital." Jules had waited for this moment. Daniel turned on the projector, displaying a chain of emails sent from Jules's company account. Messages discussing profit redistribution, restricting Daniel's access, and transfers to avoid internal audit. One email was titled, "Transfer before court date. Need to erase First West transaction trail." The room went silent. Ethan sat frozen. A board member finally spoke. "You realize this is enough to trigger a criminal investigation, right?" Daniel gave a firm glance around the table, then spoke with finality. "We're initiating an independent audit this week. For now, I propose suspending Ethan Clark as CEO, effective immediately." The vote took less than 4 minutes. Result? Unanimous. That afternoon, Ethan was escorted out of the building by security before he could finish packing his personal belongings. Jules called 3 times within the hour. No one picked up. On the 4th call, she was answered by the head of HR, who informed her that her position as business consultant was no longer valid and her company email had been deactivated. The financial network in Portland isn't large. A whisper at a cafe counter is enough. Jules became a cautionary tale. A woman who once dreamed of being the new director's wife was no longer welcome at any professional event. No one hires someone tied to illicit dealings with a disgraced former CEO. especially one who left email trails like a criminal diary. As for me, just 1 week after that meeting, Jessica filed a motion to reopen the divorce asset review, citing Ethan's failure to disclose full financial information during settlement. We submitted statements from the Cayman account, internal transfers through shell companies, and fake payroll records Ethan had created to support a lower asset valuation. His attorney, Carla, could barely respond in time. When she reviewed the voluntary documents I signed in court, she realized each clause contained a legal trap. I relinquished rights only if Ethan could prove every asset was legally acquired. He couldn't. Ethan's entire portfolio was unsealed. The house, cars, stocks, and shared investments were frozen pending investigation. The court ordered the return of all legitimate assets to me, including our home, shares in 2 companies, and nearly $1.2 million Ethan had tried to funnel through hidden channels. Ethan didn't just lose his title. He lost nearly everything. And for a man like him, the deepest cut of all, his reputation. No more speaking invitations. No more trusted partnerships. And Jules, the woman who once clung to his arm like she'd won a prize, blocked him on every platform just 2 weeks after being rejected by 3 firms in a row. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the same one once filled with Ethan's carefully curated family image decor. I drank tea, holding the final report confirming the restoration of my assets. It was drizzling outside. The house was quiet, as if it had never weathered any storm. But I knew one thing for sure. The man who destroyed this home had buried himself in the process. I thought I'd never see Ethan again. But on an early afternoon in March, he showed up at my door holding a bouquet of red roses, their stems already wilted, and a sheepish smile in place of an apology. "Hi," he said, his voice unusually soft. "I just wanted to talk, just for a bit. Is that okay?" I looked at him, not as an ex-wife, but as someone who had survived the wreckage he caused. Ethan looked worn down, his shoulders slumped, the spark in his eyes gone. The same spark that once let him walk into any room like he owned it. His suit hung loose, no longer fitting the body he used to carry with pride. I said nothing. I opened the door, not out of sympathy, but because I wanted to close this story the right way. With finality. We sat in the living room. Ethan set the bouquet on the table, his eyes wandering around the house he no longer owned, the house he once planned to sell behind my back. He began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about you, about us." I let him speak. It was the same old apologies, familiar phrases like lost, overwhelmed, mistakes. But this time, none of it touched me. When he stopped, I opened the drawer and pulled out a folder already prepared. "I think you should take another look at what you once signed," I said, placing it in front of him. Ethan flipped through the pages, bewildered. Divorce clauses, account statements, legal documents, and most importantly, an email from Jules, forwarded by Ethan himself, clearly outlining their plan to strip me of everything. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, staring directly at him. He didn't respond. His jaw twitched. His fingers clenched the edge of the folder. "This is why I don't believe a single word from your mouth anymore," I continued. "And why you need to leave, before I call my attorney to discuss trespassing on private property." He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but then simply nodded, stood, and walked out quietly. The bouquet remained on the table, abandoned like a birthday gift delivered to the wrong address. A few weeks later, I received an invitation from Daniel. He was about to take over a new Altura Capital branch in Boston. In his email, he wrote, "If you're ready for a new chapter, maybe that place is meant for you too." I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to say yes. Daniel was kind, steady, and understood the darkness I had just walked out of. But I had spent my entire youth orbiting around one man. Now, I didn't want to enter another orbit, no matter how warm or safe it seemed. I called him back. "Thank you, Daniel. But I think, right now, I need to learn how to live for myself before I know what I can share with anyone else. Daniel chuckled softly. Then you've come farther than you think, Natalie. I no longer followed news about Ethan, but Portland is a small city. I heard he left finance, started a freelance consulting firm with very few clients. As for Jules, she vanished from LinkedIn, stopped attending networking events, disappeared from every space she once confidently entered on Ethan's arm, thinking she was becoming Mrs. CEO, until one day, I saw her. In the supermarket, frozen foods aisle. She wore a faded hoodie, no makeup, her hair tied up with a thin elastic. In her cart, discounted pasta and a bag of packaged salad. Our eyes met. Jules froze for a moment, her stare blank, like someone in disbelief. I gave a small nod and turned away. No anger, no contempt. She was just a stranger. Someone who once barged into my life with ambition, but now had no place worth remembering. I spent the rest of the year planting flowers in the backyard, where Ethan once planned to build a pool. I learned pottery, befriended 3 women in my Wednesday morning yoga class. Sometimes we cooked together, shared books, and none of us talked about marriage like a trophy to cling to. One evening in late June, I drove alone to Cannon Beach, rolled the windows down, and let the ocean wind whip through my hair. I brought my old journal, the one filled with notes and plans for resistance. I tore each page, line by line, and dropped it into the campfire. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed memory to protect myself. Now I live inside my own story. No one else holds the pen. Some truths, once exposed, can shatter us, but they're also the chance to begin again, on our own 2 feet. Natalie's story isn't just about betrayal. It's a journey of awakening. From a deceived wife to the author of her life. She didn't seek revenge out of rage, but responded with intelligence, patience, and courage. And when she finally chose to live alone, it wasn't out of loneliness, but because she had learned how to trust herself. That was the real victory. What do you think of Natalie's choice? Should she eventually open her heart to Daniel? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, healing, and rediscovering yourself.